Joining in here on the new session, we will be speaking about freedom of expression and freedom of speech as creatives. An important topic today. And let us now start with a question, and we can start with you, Magle. Do we have freedom as creatives in the classical world today?
Well, technically, we all have complete freedom because we are allowed by law to do to do what we will. But I guess what you ask about is, do we have the full freedom to do whatever we want to do musically or artistically, and have it measured and have it on equal terms with other things? Sometimes, perhaps. But of course, there is a tradition, and we could talk about the modernistic tradition that has been the prevalent tradition for many years in the art music community, in the classical community. And there has been a tendency throughout time. Luckily, we are seeing a slow change, but there was a tendency that anything that incorporated melody, any melodic music, would be regarded as lesser by the simple fact that it was melodic, because it was probably considered unoriginal or derivative or something like that. So do we have the freedom? Yes, we have the freedom. We have the freedom to do it, but there are still some barriers that should be, well, you could say broken down. Music, there should be room for, in my opinion, there should be room for all music, and that includes modernistic and atonal and highly dissonant music. Everything should be, there should be a place for everything, but nothing should be disregarded purely on the basis of it using a certain technique. In this case, using melody. That should be fully regarded as on equal terms with other kinds of music.
Thank you, Magle. Very clear. We can continue to Marcus Paus. Do we have freedom as creatives now in the classical world?
Well, I certainly do. I think if you'd asked the question 25 years ago, I think the answer would be much more complicated. I do think it's a generational thing. I mean, I would echo Frederik's sentiments. I mean, there has been a tendency to think of anything melodic as, by definition, lesser or less original. I think that's changing. I think that with new generations, I think that we're starting to look at everything that came before us as a whole. And I don't want to be too postmodern about it, but I do think that, well, there's this wonderful quote by Stephen Sondheim, and anything you do, let it come from you, then it shall be new. And I think that's really where we're at. And I think there is a great tendency now among younger composers to really do whatever they want. And we're all so completely, I should say, culturally contaminated. I mean, we've heard so many different things. We've seen so many things where our palette, our references are so just vast. It's very hard just to really say that you're entirely influenced by just one thing. And I think with the younger generations, I think the whole question is really, I mean, I would imagine it's exotic to them. So at least that's been my experience working with younger musicians, and so I mean, this is something that was, I think, in my life it was really a huge question in my teens and my 20s, and I certainly felt a lot of well, I don't want to say animosity, but it was an uphill battle of sorts, and it's not anymore. And I think it's changing, and perhaps slowly, but I do think it's changing. And I back when I did my master's in New York, I was a fellow student of mine was Anna Klein, a wonderful composer, and we're a small group of people, and now she's one of the most performed contemporary composers, or at least contemporary orchestral composers, and her works are full of melody. They weren't at the time, but they are now, and I think, this is 20 years ago. But, I think it's changing, and I think, yes, it's a long answer. I could have made it very short. Yes, I do think we have complete freedom.
Okay, very interesting. Well, let's take the same question to you, Bruno Newman from the UK. Do we have freedom as creatives today in the classical world?
Yes, I think we do. We've got freedom to say, or write, or produce, or create anything we wish. What we don't have freedom is to what other people would say about it, or even get to hear it. And that's is a quite important distinction to make between what we do for ourselves in terms of our need, our desire to create art, and for the other side of it, the more practical side of having a job, being a composer, getting paid. And before you even think about getting paid, someone's got to hear it, someone's got to like it, someone's got to promote it, someone's got to win a competition. Yeah, not very likely if you don't hit these demographic and tonal targets or atonal targets of what it is. Because unfortunately, those are controlled by a minority who, for various reasons, post-World War II, have a belief that what has happened before has happened and it doesn't need to be repeated. Anything like it isn't creating anything new. And to me, it's like saying to anyone in creative literature that, yes, you've used the alphabet, great, but don't bother doing that again. We need a new alphabet in order to do new words that you can't even think about, which is fine. And then you could learn what that is, and for those in the rarefied circles at the very, very top of the top universities would understand. And everyone else, well, you clearly need an explanation, or you wouldn't even understand the explanation. And there is, I'm being a little bit farcical there, but you see my point. That is where we're at with a lot of this music, whereas if you showed it to the general public, this is what they would say. They would like some of it, and they would not like other of it. So there are certain melodies and harmonies that we have that draw on our experiences of human beings, and they make us feel alive and human. And there is definitely something to be said, drawing back to your question, that those that write in that way do not have the same exposure than others. But are we free to write? Yes, in the way that Shostakovich wasn't, for example, under the eye of Stalin. Absolutely, yes. But even so, any kind of force, external force, what it might be, and people used to say this about the blues many years ago, is that you have to have some understanding, some angst, some external pressure in order to understand what it's like, the suffering of an artist. And this is important as part of our creative process as well. So I think it's something we shouldn't shy away from. It's something that we should steel ourselves and see that as an opportunity to create more art.
Encouraging as well. Thank you so much. We have now laid some foundation for the discussion ahead. Let's quickly see where your mind at when it comes to solutions. So we have laid a foundation here so far that yes, there is some sort of individual freedom to create, but then there are obstacles. There are external obstacles, for example. Magle, Frederik Magle from Denmark. What are some solutions you see to overcoming the external obstacles to feel free as a classical musician, painter, sculptor, etc.?
First of all, I would say one thing. In itself, obstacles are not a bad thing. We do need them because they are also they're also necessary. We need a little pushback because we have like, as we all agree, complete freedom to do whatever we want. But for it to actually reach an audience and to affect an audience, it also needs to be an obstacle in the shape of, in the form of, for example, some kind of quality of the music, of of what we are delivering to the world. And that can be an obstacle, because anytime something there will often be an obstacle. It's sometimes difficult to compose. It's sometimes difficult to compose something that is of good quality. Sometimes it's very easy, and that can be very confusing. That sometimes what you thought was the easiest thing actually turns out to be this brilliant piece of genius, and what you worked and labored on for months and years turns out not to be. But that's the difference. So there needs to be obstacles, and not all obstacles are equal. So, but what we are, of course, specifically talking about here is kind of the obstacles that are artificial obstacles, and obstacles in the form of taste. And of course, there's this taste of the audience, which can be hugely broad, but there's also the taste of those in position of making decisions. And one thing I was actually wondering a little, because I heard that you had like two, of course, in agreement at some point, but also slightly different takes on it. I was wondering, is there actually, can we say that perhaps there are also some regional or national differences in this?
I'm sure there must be.
Is there a different, more open, in, I don't know, in parts of the world, or there is, I don't know if you have experienced that.
Yes, I would imagine there is, absolutely.
Yeah.
It depends on where you're born and your background, etc. And if, for example, if you wanted to go to the top conservatoires in the UK, I can only speak from those because I have some experience, then in general, the sorts of music you'd have to create would have to be of the same sort as the people that are teaching you are making. And they themselves are trying to, so it becomes self-fulfilling in this vicious cycle of creating.
And it would still be there.
Most people wouldn't want to hear.
Yeah, and still today, it's still the prevalent.
As far as I can say, I've got to be careful because I speak.
No,
I teach
of course.
in
Now
one,
we are
so,
speaking broadly, and there are
yeah.
also always
So,
exceptions.
But it's not the way I teach, but for many of my colleagues,
yeah.
yes, that's still important. And that unless you're breaking new ground, which
Yeah.
to them would be a shock value of thinking, gosh, where did that come from?
Yeah.
As in, why are you still plucking strings when you should be smashing them or breaking them or, taking a drill to them, or something just so obscure that you're thinking, now you're pushing the boundary, you're creating something new.
But how would you actually go about creating something new these days? Because it's everything has pretty much, in one way or another, been done. Even everything that any modernist can imagine putting into writing or non-writing or whatever has been done during the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And so forth. I would imagine. In some cases, I do believe that this focus on this obsession with originality, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's fear-based, and I think rarely good things come out of based of fear.
Well, I think that's a very, very good question. When you think about originality, especially the things that you like, you think that was original, it isn't.
No.
And all it takes is a small piece of analysis to think, I know why people like that, because this is fresh, but the rest of it isn't. The rest of it is just, that's borrowed from that, that's borrowed from that, he's redesigned that, he's put that on top, he's put it into this form here and set it over here, and that's why people like it. No one will truly like something that is completely original.
No.
You only have to look at the reactions of the Rite of Spring and or various other times it takes people to understand it. But even then, there'll still be precedents.
Oh yes, indeed. The
Well,
Rite of Spring was very clearly based on the Russian and French
absolutely. So they don't
tradition.
come from nothing. So if you force someone to create something that is out of their comfort zone and perhaps even stretches our definition of what we would call music, you're going to get, garbage in, garbage out. It's going to create something that...
I don't think you can actually deliberately make something that is fully original. Maybe at some point during the process, you will actually realize, oh, this was actually in some way original. But it's simply not, because if you set out to do something that, I must do something original, then you have kind of given yourself a limit, and not in a limit in a good way, because limits can be good and necessary. But it's interesting that that you have actually experienced it a little bit different.
Well, I mean,
more
just
freedom, more freedom.
Well, in my experience, well, I guess I've been very fortunate, but let me put it this way. About 20 years ago, I moved to New York, and I did my master's there, and the reason why I moved there was most of the contemporary music at the time that I was interested in was written by American composers, and I was fortunate enough to study with a couple of them, so going back to what you were saying in terms of academia, and if there are different schools of thought or different kinds of openness. I certainly experienced a greater sense of openness moving there, and certainly with my inclination as a composer, it was a better environment for me. I still think, you know, the whole concept of originality, going back to the Sondheim quote, I think it's more really about singularity and about individuality. I don't really subscribe to the idea of any sort of absolute origin that doesn't belong to all of us. I mean, humanity is not really very original. Our lives aren't all that original. I mean, we eat and love much the same way as our ancestors did and as our children will do. And it's a very communal, very general thing. And I think that a lot of the things that we are inclined to like or inclined to listen for might be, or actually are quite similar, even regardless of aesthetics. Now, it's been 20 years since I had any sort of experience with musical academia. So I wouldn't, I mean, I'm loath to discuss how things are like either in New York or in Oslo. I mean, I don't even know what things are like at the Regional Academy. I just don't know. I know who teaches there, but what I get from the students that I see coming out of these institutions is that there seems to be a general lenience towards freedom of expression. And I think, you know, the question in terms of what's a solution? Yeah. Well, I mean, the simplest solution is the hardest one, is just write really well. You will tend to get noticed. And there are so many really gifted, wonderful young composers coming out now that impress me all the time. I'm part of the advisory board for the Norwegian Society of Composers, so we look at applicants, and a lot of them are younger composers, and quite a lot of them actually impress me. And one of the things that really impresses me is that, of course, this is not, I can't really generalize, but I mean, there is a tendency, I think, among some of them to be more interested in craft. So, so there's a sense of traditional craftsmanship. A lot of it actually through film music. A lot of them, you know, grow up listening to John Williams or other people who are great craftsmen. And so there's a tendency, and also through, I think, online resources like Orchestration Online and Thomas Goss's work and so on, which reaches probably millions of people.
Great work and very useful for...
Absolutely, and it's new. This is entirely new, and it's an internet thing. And I kind of feel a little, bummed that I missed out on it.
You had to do the hard way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's still there, but I'm no longer in my teens or 20s, and so there's that. But on the other hand, going about it the hard way is useful too. But from my experience in terms of, there's a curatorial aspect to this, which, and we're talking about sort of power concentration. Of course, whenever we talk about that, it's easy to sort of imagine a body of powerful people, and it doesn't really work like that. So, much of the time it's kind of haphazardous. So again, I would just say that, the best thing is to write as well as you possibly can. And if you do, then you might have to do it for a while, but eventually someone will notice it and appreciate that work. And it tends to transcend aesthetic boundaries, and it will tend to transcend tastes. But it's time consuming. It might take you all your life, and it might take another life beyond yours, but I granted.
Sometimes happens.
Yeah, absolutely. But granted, we all want to be recognized within our own timeline. But I think I mean, I'm generally quite positive. I think that things are looking up. I think it's easier now, certainly, than it was. At least it's certainly easier for me now than it was 20 years ago. And I know that it is for other people too. I mean, again, look at Anna Klein. She has a thriving career, and she writes music that's very melodic and very tuneful, and very colorful, and something that might not have been embraced the same way 20 years ago. On the other hand, maybe it would have been. There were people 20 years ago writing music that was also very accessible. I'm thinking of people like John Corigliano, wonderful composer, who's written music that there's been, or even someone like Otto Pettit, who's
he became the most played composer, contemporary classical composer, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think there's always room for it, and there always has been. But it's been kind of a niche market, and it's been something sort of separate from our mainstream conception of contemporary music. But I think that's changing. I don't know if that's your experience, but I mean, it certainly has been mine.
It's very positive.
Wonderful. In the direction of solutions, and in the spirit we've been speaking about here, is that wherever how we want others to treat us, we should treat them, basically. A pretty basic virtue there. And something that I've been experiencing and listening to is this: sometimes there's a strawman argument against tonal music, beauty, and that makes it easier to dispose of it, and it becomes very easy to overcome. And I think that really, if we're able to make Ironmans instead of strawmans, this can be a way to actually start having more discussions and unity and working more together. In a more pluralistic direction that the classical world is taking. So why don't you have a short take on a Iron Man, on a good thing about modernism in the classical world, something that we can say, you know what, I understand that you fight for this is important, and there might be something we can learn from that. And you can start, any can start as the ideas come.
So the question is to
what we can learn from modernism.
What you appreciate with modernism in the classical world as a creative, as that ideology, and is there anything there that we can appreciate and say that's valuable, that we have something to learn from it?
Oh,
well, in a way, that was also a strive for when it first appeared. We can discuss in the ways that it became kind of oppressive in itself, but in itself. There was also a freedom in that. In that case, there was the freedom from the bounds of tonality, but that was a worthwhile endeavor in itself. The thing that, in my opinion, where it went wrong, where the modernism became the only allowed, when it became kind of like a totalitarian system and not allowing and pushing out all other things. But in itself, I think there's much to learn, and that freedom from tonality would be wonderful if that includes a freedom for tonality, to use tonality. So the complete freedom is actually, in my opinion, the goal. Freedom, but with craftsmanship, high quality of craft.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I have no reservations whatsoever about anything aesthetically, or any aesthetic aspect of modernism. I don't like the ideology of academic modernism, but that's an ideological thing. It's not an aesthetic thing. I mean, a lot of my favorite music is modernist. A lot of my favorite art is. There are aspects of it that appeal to me. There are aspects. I mean, certainly there are a lot of things that we can use even as tonal composers. So many of just the timbres, the textures, the orchestral techniques, extended techniques. There are so many things that just did not come out of Romanticism or classical tradition at all, and it's part of how we've. I mean, it's an expansion of what we've had, and now it's all kind of it's all. Part of who we are. It's part of our common musical experience. It's not really modern. It hasn't been modern for quite a while, but it's it still has merit. There are things that can be. I mean, you can use it. Most of what I write would not be possible to write without more modernistically inclined composers having gone before and having had perhaps a more, liberatorial approach to writing. I don't think they really did, not the good ones anyway. I mean, all great art is always sensual. There's always a great sense of love in all of it, if it's truly good. But I mentioned Rite of Spring, which I guess is perhaps the most important work of the 20th century, and the musical work of the 20th century, and it's certainly the most groundbreaking, and it's kind of where everything started. It's where we can absolutely say. I mean, of course, there are precedents for it, as you mentioned, but that now has become completely classical. It's completely. It's one of the most central pieces of our classical canon, and so much in that music has contributed to so much music that does not sound like it at all. I mean, think of composers such as Ravel, who was very inspired by Stravinsky. They were good friends, and Ravel's music is entirely different. But so much of what Ravel wrote, especially his chamber music, could not have been written without, having kind of peeked into the process and labors of his friend. And I think it's always like that. And again, it comes back to personality. It comes back to inclinations and what you like and who you are and what whatever floats your boat.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Marcus Paus from Norway. Back to Bruno Newman from the UK. What are your thoughts on this? Is there any Ironmans to build in modernism, something we can respect by setting an example of trying to bring more unity and learn from each other, and for everything that has gone before us, even modernism, which is now also in one way part of history?
Yes, and the surprising thing is here as well, I'm going to argue for the other side, it is crucial that we press and prod and poke and stretch and break boundaries wherever we can as artists. That's what we do. And see what works, see if, try something and see. And if you do need to shock, then yes, but it has to be a primal force from yourself. It has to be a visceral energy to be able to do it, rather than to, to something that's formulaic, which you're told, no, nothing with a key signature. If it has a tonal center, we're not interested, which is absurd as far as I'm concerned, because we're trying to create art. So yes, there is much that we can do, and new ground has absolutely been done in terms of extended techniques on instruments, pushing boundaries in completely different ways. And yet, if we try and offer this to the great general public, it's rare to find anyone that doesn't like music. Everyone's got an iPhone, used to be an iPod. Everyone listens to something. They're not going to be able to say, oh yes, G sharp 97. No, they won't. But they will know what they like. And they have a voice. They have a vote, right? So if you were to ask them, in general, they would like things that are popular. I mean, there is a reason for that. That's why it's definitively popular. And the things that they tend to like are generally things that speak to them. They are certain melodies, certain harmonic movements, etc. And absolutely things can be pushed into different ways, and especially if they're written by people that are performing them or singing them or have some strong connection to them, rather than what we have is beginning to have now is this homogeneity of just grayness, of cinematic toolkits that anyone could just press a button on and then create something else, or a string run or wind run in the style of John Williams. We're becoming, unfortunately, a parody of ourselves, where anyone with this can call themselves a composer. And naturally what is happening is that we're creating noise, lots and lots and lots of noise. If you want to get noticed amongst this static, it's not going to happen. And writing beautiful music in itself is not going to be enough. Try that on Spotify and see how many, even the most beautiful melody that will just sing and melt your heart will not get anywhere. It's not enough.
Well,
so
Spotify
what do you
is
need?
not,
You do need patrons,
Yeah.
as was mentioned before. You need someone, you need a champion. You need to win some competitions. You need to have some kind of elevation where someone says, you've got to hear this. This is going to melt your heart. It's going to be great. Yeah, and then that happens. That happens with influencers. It happens with the new world that we need to look in. But to answer your question, is there much we can learn from it? Yes, I think there is. However, it has its place in the same way as punk rock had its place in terms of kicking and pushing and prodding the boundaries at the time, and the effect that had on new romanticism and pop music in the 80s is still being felt today, and you know, from the Britpop revolution of the 90s, etc., and beyond, you know, and Seattle punk, all sorts of things came from that, of this kicking back at authority, and I do think that is important, and it should never be something which we say shouldn't be done.
Okay, very interesting. And I think we get comments here that this is spot on from the audience online. So good to have you with us. Now over to the other side of the coin. So a lot of issues and control can be solved through good communication. I believe in that. So what are Iron Man argument that maybe those who are restricting freedom, not your freedom to create, but really restricting the ability to reach and get the music out there, and maybe in some way also limiting your ability to stay encouraged through the process. What's a good argument that you want them to understand? If they only understood why I'm actually for this, it seems like then we could actually start. We can actually. I think deep down they must agree with this, because this makes sense. This is common sense. Do you have anything like that about tonal, beautiful music, free to use any epoch, any history you want? Well, what's a good thing, let's say, a suppressor should understand to lower their aggressiveness?
Well, there's a simple democratic argument that there should be. I mean, why shouldn't there be room for this? You know, it's undemocratic. If we deny it, we're being totalitarian, right. Which we don't particularly want to be, and at least we didn't used to.
Good, clear, to the point. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, there is the argument, I suppose, that the cream will rise eventually. That's the way that something that is manifestly good and beautiful will be appreciated. It may not be immediate, which is what everyone is used to these days. They want instant dopamine. They want their likes. And as we know from our classical history, many composers were not appreciated in their own timelines, and that may not happen. But one of the great beauties of our job as artists, as creators of this wonderful thing that reflects this human condition, is that whatever we do create is permanent, and especially now in the digital age, it's highly unlikely ever to be lost. As many other artworks, there will be a copy of it. There'll be a photo of a painting or a sculpture or some kind of memory that will be available for other people to discern in the future what they think about it, and maybe have different opinions. But it's, that's the greatest thing, that in time these things could have a different perspective as it has done in the past.
Well, there's also the thing that's important to keep in mind, that we are all listening with a concept in a context. We are not listening. We're not listeners or creators in a complete vacuum, and that also means that whether we want it or not, we all have some kind of preconceived notions, and so the ability to be surprised and the ability is something that is actually a good thing to practice, to be able to also to try to, and this goes probably for a lot of critics, it would probably be a good idea. I think critics has a very valuable role also still to this day, because there is so much noise that we need some kind of help in clearing out. But obviously critics has also this great power. So with a cliched, with great power comes great responsibility. Thanks, Spider-Man. But it's really true, because the critics needs to kind of like also be able to attempt to put their preconceived notions, because usually, of course, there are some general things you can say about craft. And these and they can actually be explained in a somewhat objective way. to a very high degree, actually. But there are also matters of taste. And when it comes to matters of taste, it's important to kind of like try, when you listen to something you haven't heard before and haven't already conceived your opinion on, trying to understand at least what was the intention of the composer. So in a way, what could help here is also a greater sense of empathy towards the music that is being heard.
That's a very good point. I like that. But what you're doing is showing some kind of feeling. That's the basis of empathy. And I get that. And you know, I can hear something, I really don't like this. It makes me angry. But that means it's affecting me. That's a good thing, right? You're reflecting an emotion. The worst possible thing is just boredom. It does nothing. It's just a non-thing that I wouldn't even know what it sounded like, couldn't repeat it. It's just, and that's possibly the worst thing you can say about any piece of music. So, yeah, anything that makes you feel something has a purpose, and in a way has stamped its place on art.
Well, very good. We have time for one more question here today. What is something you each can do in your individual lives to be facilitators of more freedom as creatives? One thing is that we are creating our work. We are making music. We are making sculptures. We're making paintings, etc. But we also have a voice. We're also leaders. Many people are looking to us for leadership, especially in these days. The creatives has received a very high status as somebody to seek advice from. And what is something you will do so you can bring in more of that sense of freedom in the landscape and internally in creatives, in the new generations coming?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll give it. I'll start, and then you can.
Okay.
Well. Basically, just raising the voice as often as possible about that you can actually do, and for me, one of my mantras are to avoid fear and try to avoid fear. Avoid being fearful in what you do, in what you create. Avoid being dictated by fear. Your own fear is always the worst. And I agree, there is probably not a big cabal of people, but you may imagine it and you may feel it. Try not to be fearful. Try to be courageous in your work, because whenever you let fear, your own fear or someone else's fear, dictate your life or your creation, which is probably the same, then the result will not be good. So I will simply try to, whenever I have a chance, to instill a sense of fearfulness amongst fellow composers, younger composers, students, whatever. Generally.
Okay. Concrete, very good.
I think there are two main sort of courses of action. One is personal and the other is structural. I think personally, it's for me, it's a question of trying to be as generous as I can with colleagues, trying to foster good relationships with colleagues, trying to help whenever I can, certainly trying to help younger talents emerge, and just be as charitable and kind as you would have wanted someone to be towards you once upon a time, which is very simple, but it's the thing is, our profession is such a self-absorbed, such a solipsistic, lonely profession. You so easily lose track of anything beyond yourself. So I think whenever we get a chance to do so, or whenever we are reminded that music is so much bigger than we are, that can help, and it can kind of be an incentive to be more vigilant about younger talents. The other thing is structural, which is I think we need to foster more or better relationships between musicians and composers, conductors and composers, orchestras and composers. I really wish more orchestras would see this as an opportunity. Very few do. And so I think my fond hope for the future of I guess, orchestral well-being would be to see stronger relationships between composers and orchestras, or stronger relationships, better relationships between composers or creatives of all sorts and art institutions. I think basically we need each other, and we need to recognize that.
It's essential.
Yeah.
It's essential. But isn't there also a problem about the orchestras being fearful of
Certainly has been.
funding
Yeah.
and on audience attendance and
Absolutely, and even I think even aesthetic aspects. I mean, I think there's been there has been. I don't think maybe so much anymore, but I think certainly there's been for a couple of generations there was probably an actual fear of contemporary music.
Yeah.
If you go back maybe. Well, probably now quite a few generations, because even players who were active in the 50s and 60s, or I mean, if you look at some of the, I mean, I even know players who were active at least back in the 60s and 70s, and they're just phenomenal musicians, and they were open-minded. They're open-minded now, and they were open-minded back then. But I think there might have been, there might have been some practical problems. People would write orchestral pieces that just required so much rehearsal time that it's just not feasible. So that's the other thing. I mean, we as composers can also kind of do a better job, I think.
So it goes both ways.
Yes.
The orchestras and ensembles and musicians can reach out to composers,
Yeah.
and composers can do a better job of be empathetic with the musicians.
Yes, yes, that's a great way of putting it.
I think that's important too. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Good point. Bruno?
So I have 3 words. Learn your craft. This is so important. There is no shortcut. I'm sorry, there isn't. I've met, my long life, I've met some very musical people, highly musical people that were not trained, but they needed to be trained. But there was potential, there's talent in there, but they cannot suddenly understand the compass of instruments and understand the textures of orchestration and be able to put these together. There is a process. If you think and consider for a moment the music that we all know and love from, be it the 20th century, 19th century, wherever, those composers were trained over many years, decades of studying with other people, of listening, of learning, and there would be a process in the end of what we would now call studying harmony, studying counterpoint. Then you go on to understanding instrumentation and then orchestration and texture, all of these things. Now, because of the accessibility of things that will give us a sense of that at a touch of a button on a keyboard, and anyone can call themselves a composer, we're in a problem, because if people think it's easy, just like going to McDonald's and having a burger, and that's generally, tasty-ish, that is an equivalent to haute cuisine. It isn't. So learn your craft. There's no other way of doing it than starting from a good manual. One of the great things about accessibility is that's all there. IMSLP has scores galore. Your entire lifetime and other people's lifetimes, you will not be able to get the accessibility to all of these scores. They're so score read. Understand how the music is made up. And in doing so, it's very much a reflection of what you've said of understanding what the player is. That wind players have to breathe, for example. And understanding that the balance is with an orchestra. And from that, if you get yourself a good mentor as well, and there are many, many older people that are very, very willing, as you say, with this generosity of spirit, to be able to help younger people as well, then new and beautiful music will be created.
Very, very encouraging words there. And so we have been speaking about freedom on different levels. Here you're also mentioning that there's actually a liberation of yourself. If you educate yourself, if you learn your craft, you will have more freedom, you will also have more empathy, you will understand other people's, their needs, you'll understand the musicians, we can make more bridges. So we have been mentioning some of the spots of the structural, we have seen some good points, our willingness to build bridges as we do step into a more pluralistic future, into the classical world. That also means a need for leadership, direction, so we're moving in a good direction. And I want to just extend an applause now from the room here for the nice discussion. It's wonderful to see here 3 voices, Frederik Magle from Denmark, we have Marcus Paus from Norway, and Bruno Newman from the UK, all sharing their perspectives, also showing the international community that is being built and hopefully will help to provide and overcome any type of personal or structural limitations when it comes to freedom. So thank you very much for being with us, and we will go into a break.
Thank you.